Welcome to the Reed Talk Podcast, the podcast that brings reed-making tips and lightheartedness to your reed-making desk. Each episode features a leading oboist in our field and does a deep dive into a question on every oboist's mind. How do I become a more successful reed maker? Joining us today to share his insight on reed making is Russ Deluna, the solo English horn player of the San Francisco Symphony and faculty at the San Francisco Conservatory of Music. Let's talk reeds. I'm Courtney Miller.
And I'm Margaret Marco.
Welcome, Russ. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. Looking forward to it.
I'd like to start by asking you if you could describe your dream reed.
A dream English horn reed for me would be one that I can play really extremely high well on, and as well the low register being super responsive and large and resonant, and then one that can articulate really well. And ideally, I like to make the reed play to myself so that I don't have to do a lot of manipulation with my embouchure. So one that I could just basically use very little embouchure and just blow a lot. Mm-hmm. Yeah, just a reed that sits up and is easy and super responsive.
Do you have any reed tests that might help you determine that?
I find for me when I'm making my reeds, the notes that give me problems, and I think for most people when they make English horn reeds, the upper A flat and A can be problematic, because if there's too much out of the back or too much out of the heart, they can want to sink on those notes. Mm-hmm. A lot of young players, when they first approach the English horn reed and start making English horn reeds, get the impression a lot of times that the upper A flat and upper A are really hard to get to play in tune, because they tend to want to take too much out of the back. In order to make the reeds sit up, it's really important for me that they crow C sharp, at least, and that there's not too much out of the back or out of the heart, especially. That's one of my big tests, is like I'll play the New World Symphony solo, A flat, B flat, C, just to make sure everything's in line. And then for articulation, I like to do the Fête, second movement of Nocturnes of Debussy, just to make sure that it articulates well. I really like to play in the high register on the English horn, so I really love the Rob Roy overture, the Berlioz. So I often use that as a test, just to make sure that my high register, that a reed can works well in the high register.
I love that your tests are repertoire based. Just check those solos, and I mean, after all, that's what you want to know, if you can play those important excerpts.
That's one of the things I learned after I got my job. So I did less of that, I think, before I got the job.
Mm-hmm. Before a big performance like Rob Roy or Ravel Piano Concerto, how many reeds do you like to have ready?
I just kind of get obsessed with keeping my reed case full, and I usually carry a bunch around with me. So I make a lot of reeds. I'll have 12 reeds that I can choose from.
Wow.
Oh.
And I'm rotating them. And we usually do 3 to 4 concerts, so I try to make myself play each rehearsal on a different reed, so that when I get into the concerts, I know I have several that I've played it on before.
Wow, that was actually a jaw-dropping moment on my end when you said 12 reeds. That to me I'm very impressed to have 12 really beautiful English horn reeds. So I'm quite impressed.
When I went on my first tour with the symphony, we went to Europe for 3.5 weeks, and we were doing Mahler 7, and we didn't do anything that had a huge English horn solo, but there was a lot of playing. Mm-hmm. And I'd never done a big European tour, and I took 80 reeds.
Oh!
Yeah.
80 finished reeds?
No.
Okay.
I tied up. I probably had 50 that played, but I still had a bunch of blanks and reeds that were in various stages. Because, you're dealing with different, you never know on tour what weather or barometric pressure and all that's going to be like. But
of course.
And I was overdoing it, but better be safe than sorry.
Better to be prepared, yeah. Better to be prepared than not.
Yeah.
Well, I'm curious. You said that you play a different reed every rehearsal leading up to a big concert. Would you say that's your break-in process, or do you have a break-in process?
I don't, actually. On a new reed, when I finish a reed at home and I feel like I like it, I'll play on it for a couple hours at home to, play Barrett or, just practice what I'm playing on it at home. I don't like to play a reed in rehearsal that I haven't spent some time on at home first.
Right.
So,
well, could you describe how you take a reed from a blank to a finished reed?
I don't do a long process. I mean, I do find that the more time I take, the longer the reeds last. So ideally, I like to take my time with it, but I don't. We play so much. I don't always do that. And I'm also a big proponent of not leaving my blanks unclipped open. I always make sure they're clipped open. I tend to like larger openings anyway. So I always tell my students to not leave them unclipped. Although I know some really good players that do, so I've tried it and it does work. But for me, I like the kind of opening I get when I leave it clipped open, and make sure it's in the position it's going to be in the first time it dries out. So then the first big test for me is, does it grab the plaque tightly? And if it doesn't, I usually don't keep going with it.
Oh, yeah.
It must grab the plaque really tightly. So then I'll get it playing in one sitting, and I'll play on it a little bit, and it'll be, the next time I soak it up the next day, it'll be too big and probably maybe drop and crow, and I'll refine it again. So maybe 2 or 3 days I'll spend getting the reed to a point of where I can play it in rehearsal.
Okay.
I mean, I can do it quicker. Like I make myself practice making a reed from scratch, even just gouge the cane, tie it up, and make it play, and then play on it. And I've gotten to where I can do that pretty well. John DeLoe, one of my teachers, Atlanta Symphony Principal Oboe, a long time, that's how he worked. He would throw cane in the water at 6 p.m. and gouge it and tie it up and go play a concert on it.
Wow.
So that was the example that I had. So I thought that was normal, which I find out that it's really not.
Well, especially the gouging part. Most people do that a little bit ahead of time.
I've met several people lately that like to gouge. Phil Ross, one of my best friends, he likes to do that too. Gouges and ties the reed and makes it.
Great.
And it's a different feel, but yes. I like to gouge the cane ahead of time, and most of the time. If I'm having my way and I have lots of time to work, I like to take my time and work them in slowly. Certainly had a lot of time to do that lately. So.
Right.
Oof, isn't that the truth?
Yeah.
Well, you kind of answered this a little bit, but who are some of your reed-making mentors? John DeLoe?
I did my undergrad with Ray Still at Northwestern, and then I went to Atlanta. I got married and we moved to Atlanta, and my wife got really sick. I was going to do my grad work at Northwestern, so I dropped out of Northwestern and we moved to Atlanta. And I went to an Atlanta Symphony concert and heard John DeLoe play and thought, oh my goodness, I need to go study with this person. So I called him up and we had lessons, and he was one of my largest reed influences for sure. He even made me sit down and learn how to set up my gouger and everything. He was very thorough. He was not real hands-on. He finished maybe 4 or 5 of my reeds. He would look at the reed and say something, but he wouldn't do it for you, which I tend to want to do too much for my students a lot of times, and I'm finding more and more that it's better to let them figure it out on their own. Then I did my grad work with Ralph Gomberg, and his reeds were quite different, and he had retired by that time, so we didn't do a lot with reeds. It was more just the music. One of my biggest English horn reed influence was Robert Walters. Oh. I never really had an English horn lesson before I went and had one with him. I had taken an audition for Houston Symphony back in 2004, I think it was, and back when Stefan Farkas had won, and it got down to the two of us. And during that time, in preparation, like we played and got it down to the two of us. Then they were going to have us 5 months later come back and play excerpts with the orchestra. Oh. So I had to stay in audition mode for those 5 months somehow, which is really hard to do. So during that time, I thought, well, I'll go have a lesson with Rob Walters. Maybe he can, I should probably do that. So I went and saw him, and I went to start playing for him, and he says, "Why are you playing for me?" I said, "Because you're in the Cleveland Orchestra, and you're awesome." And he's like, "You don't need to play for me. You know this stuff." He said, "I think I can help you more with reeds." And we looked at reeds, and he took 5 of my reeds, and our reeds, hold them up to the light. They looked pretty much the same. Dimensions were the same, proportions and everything. But he showed me a way to finish the tip, just going off the end of the tip to the plaque more than what I was doing. And he did that to 5 of my reeds, and it just kind of changed my life for some reason.
Oh, that's
It was
great.
It was really, really eye-opening, yeah. So that was a big moment for me for reed making. And
I love
he's like,
those kind of stories.
You should probably do that with your oboe reeds too. So
yeah. That's a wonderful story.
Yeah, he was very helpful. He said, I don't know why you're playing for me because you sound great. He's like, mark my words, you will have a big job one day.
Wow.
And actually that did more for me than anything because he gave me confidence by saying that. Mm-hmm. And it kind of gave me a stamp of approval of what I was doing and what I had, the approach I'd taken and stuff. So, yeah, I owe him a lot for that lesson.
Yeah. So important to get that confidence building.
Can you tell us a little bit more about the nuts and bolts of your setup? So what gouge you use, what shaper tip you recommend, your tying length, more of the stats, so to speak?
So when I first got the job, I owned 3 English horn gougers. I had 2 Inalettis and a Ross.
Wow.
One of the Inalettis and the Ross I bought from Pat McFarlane when he retired. Mm-hmm. And the other one I had just bought when I won the job. But I will confess that I played on store-bought gouge cane for 3 or 4 years.
Oh.
Mm-hmm. How lame is that?
I had
3 gougers. I know. I had 3 gougers and didn't use any of them. Because this is the problem. When you get addicted to a gouge, and I couldn't get any of my gougers to feel as good as what I was ordering from Inaletti.
Right.
I do understand.
And I maybe it was a superstitious thing or something, but I just felt like I couldn't make anything on anything else but that. But then I thought, okay, this is ridiculous. Like 4 or 5 years in, I'm like, I have 3 gougers that are not doing anything. So time to like bite the bullet. So I stopped ordering cane and just made myself use. And I got it figured out. Yeah. So I have my 2 inlays that I really like. And my buddy Phil has gone over my Ross machine several times, and we finally have it to where I like it. So I can make reeds on it as well. Mm. My main thing is the Inalettis, though. And for shape, when I first got the job, I used a -1, Gilbert -1. And I tied it on really short. I tied it on at like 57, which is crazy. I look back at my reeds. I keep reeds, for I have a reed museum. Like, I won the audition on this job. And so I'll look at it sometimes like, oh my God, I had no idea what I was doing. But,
but you won something on it. It's in your reed museum.
I don't know, yeah.
kind of was figuring it out, but I was like, how did I get that to work? But so then I switched to my predecessor's tip, Julie Jacobassi's tip, and I used it for about 8 years. This is my 14th season. Yeah. And so about 2 years ago, I switched